Good afternoon and welcome to the GATC Health virtual KOL event. At this time, all attendees are in a listen-only mode. A question and answer session will follow the fireside chat. If you'd like to submit a question, you may do so by using the Q&A text box at the bottom of the webcast player. As a reminder, this call is being recorded and a replay will be made available on the GATC website following the conclusion of the event. I'd now like to turn the call over to Dr. Rahul Gupta, President at GATC Health. Please go ahead, Rahul.
Thank you, Tara, and hello, and welcome to GATC Health webinar designed to discuss Derisq, the pre-investment report predicting safety, efficacy, and off-target risks. My name is Dr. Rahul Gupta, and I have the privilege of serving as the president here at GATC Health. I am honored to be moderating today's conversation with an exceptional panel of thought leaders and industry experts. Our discussion today is going to take place basically in two parts. First, in the first about 30 minutes or so, we're going to be having our panelists who are going to share their insights on the evolving landscape of biotech investment, innovation, and risk management. And in this very exciting second half, we're going to be opening the floor up for Q&A session, where you all are going to be able to submit your questions directly to the chat box, and we're really excited about that. Now, let me get started with our panel. Our panel is comprised of Lin Yu. Lin Yu is a Ph.D. and is currently the Managing Director for Royalty Private Credit. CBC Group is Asia's largest healthcare dedicated asset management firm with an AUM of $10.5 billion. He previously served as Managing Director at Oppenheimer and Company, where he led the firm's healthcare investment banking and royalty monetization practice. He's advised a broad range of life sciences and med tech companies on capital raising and strategic financing. Dr. Yu earned a PhD and an MS from Columbia University in chemical engineering, where he focused his research on the next generation DNA sequencing technologies. Next, we have Tomas Philipson. Thomas J. Philipson served as the acting chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, where he advised on national economic and healthcare policy. Now, earlier in his career, Dr. Philipson served as the senior economic advisor to the head of the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, and subsequently as a senior economic advisor to the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. He is a co-founder of Precision Health Economics, a healthcare consulting firm that was sold in 2015. Next, we have Greg Sarafin. As a member of the Ernst & Young Global Leadership Team, Greg was the global managing partner for EY Partner Ecosystem. He has led strategic initiatives that help clients navigate rapid transformation across industries. Now, before joining EY, he spent more than a decade in executive leadership roles spanning technology and banking and digital innovation. Greg earned a BS in computer science and engineering from the University of Pennsylvania. And our fourth panelist is going to be Ty Lam. We're going to be hearing from our own Chief Business Officer, Ty Lam, who's going to present a high-level overview of what Derisq can do for you. That means the biotech CEO, the investor, the fund manager, the banker, from all the range from investment, due diligence, and portfolio optimization to pipeline prioritization and capital raising. At its core, Derisq is the pre-investment intelligence report, which is designed to predict safety, efficacy, and off-target risks, which really empowers investors and executives with the data-driven confidence to make better, faster, and safer decisions. So let's go ahead and dive in without further delay. Lynn, let me start with you. As an investment banker with deep experience in biotech, I want to ask, what are you seeing in the current investment landscape? What do you believe investors need most in today's Derisq environment for their investments and significantly improving their ROI in this space?
Well, thank you, Dr. Gupta, for having me on the panel. Really appreciate it. It's quite an honor and privilege to be with a esteemed group of panelists on this. So as a recovering former investment banker, and I've been in investing role for the last 15 years or so, I could tell you that it's no secret. The biotech investing world is under a bit of pressure. If you look at what's happened in the broader market, whether it's public or private market in healthcare and biotech specifically, there's a bit of an underperformance that's going on in the space. And this is a little bit unprecedented. And as an investor, a bit of scary for people in my position. A lot of us are kind of sitting on the sideline. A lot of us, quite honestly, do not know how to assess risk in this environment because the reward risk profile is skewed towards one end, and it just doesn't seem to be balanced. Kind of go back a little bit, what's happening is we went through the boom of 2020, 2021, 22, where a lot of assets came to the public domain, became public traded company, um, without the risk profile being properly assessed. So what's happening right now, and as capital market become a little bit more conservative, people like us are taking a closer look at what the risk profile of these assets are. And there's a little bit pullback. There is a little, if you look at the number of IPOs that's going on in biotech space, if you look at the number of follow-ons, it has significantly underperformed over a year-over-year average. Risk is a concern, right? So from my perspective, risk is correlated strongly to return. So how do I minimize my risk? How do I, feel comfortable deploy capital into a world that is becoming increasingly risk averse? And that's on top of mine. That's top of my peers' mind all the time. So I think the issue that we're trying to address, not to mention that there are over a quarter of public traded biotech companies that's trading under enterprise value. Why is that? Is it fair to say that these assets do not have any intrinsic value associated to them? I don't think that's a fair statement. It's the fact that we need to discover what these values are, right? By removing the risk associated with them. So that's what we're looking at. That's why the current environment is a little bit challenging, and we're looking for solutions.
I think that's very well said. I mean, it's important, as you mentioned, that to lower the risk and to get this landscape moving in a way for ROI. So thank you for that, Len. Let me turn over to Tomas. Now, from your vantage point, as an economist with experience in highest levels of the American government, how do you, Tomas, see the economic trends shaping the future of biotech funding and innovation? And let me just ask that what, if any, do you feel is the role of the regulatory bodies that are playing in this modern landscape?
Yeah, I think the future is a little bit troublesome. There's bipartisan agreement that biopharma, who extends life of people, get treated like cigarette companies who shorten the life of people, essentially. So it's a reputational issue, I think, that's going on, and therefore there's a lot of pressure on pricing. We saw the Inflation Reduction Act that came in 2022, and we analyzed the effects of that at University of Chicago, and had much larger drop off in innovation than CBO had. CBO had minimal effects on innovation. Turned out that we at University of Chicago were even in our estimates, which were called non-credible at the time, we're actually underestimating the effects. If you look at earnings calls currently that are pretty disciplined, given that you can get sued or put in prison if you lie to investors. So in those earnings calls, we have larger drop-off in pipeline reduction and abandoned molecules, cited the IRA being cited as the reason why. That now coupled up with most favored nation pricing, which is even more damaging because IRA cuts the end of the life cycle of a drug. MFN cuts at the start, at the launch of this drug, essentially cuts the pricing. So it's much more damaging to innovative return if that essentially takes a hold. Now, it's been done deal by deal, and there's some positive developments with the UK, in the last couple of weeks. That deal actually looked much better, where pricing in foreign countries get treated with trade agreements as opposed to price controls, which I think I've been very much against. But it's almost like a NATO issue where U.S. needs to enforce foreign spending on innovative drugs that prevents the free riding of foreign countries instead of doing it through price controls. That's exactly what happened with the UK agreement, where a 25% increase on innovative drug spending will take place in the UK in exchange for dropping the tariffs on pharmaceuticals from the UK. That's exactly the type of policy development we have argued for in the past, and I think it would be very useful if it's going forward. I don't think it will completely offset all the price controls that's taking place with individual companies such as Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Pfizer already in the running on those. So it is a negative impact on future return. That therefore means that you need to cut your cost of development, and that's where de-risk, I think, is essential. Currently, it costs about more than $2 billion, not for each drug that succeeds, but if you take into account all the failure R&D spending on failed phases going forward to an NDA or BLA, that needs to be reduced, and that's where de-risks, I think, is essential. You need to take care of the future earnings risk, essentially, by reducing your development risk. And I think that's essential for companies going forward in order for them to be profitable and not start dropping their pipeline like we saw in response to these policy developments.
Well, Thomas, this is exactly why we like you having so much on this panel, because you are just telling us exactly what's needed in terms of getting the pipeline moving, with especially the drug discovery part of this, which is the heaviest cost, which can be improved. So thank you for those comments. Let me turn over to Greg now. Now, Greg, you were instrumental in scaling the AI adoption for some of the world's largest enterprises during your tenure as the global vice chair of the ecosystem at Ernst & Young. Based on that experience, let me ask you, how do you see AI transforming the way biotech companies evaluate and manage risk?
Well, that is the key issue. If we look, Dr. Gupta, at where a lot of the press is in the space right now, you see a lot of big name technical executives, tech executives, talking about all the molecules they're going to generate with AI, which is probably true. They probably will generate a lot of molecules. That actually doesn't necessarily help us as a society or as a capital market system to get flooded with molecules if we can't distinguish the molecules that are worthy of using finite clinical trial infrastructure versus those that are not. Because there's no molecule that any AI is going to develop that's going to get to skip the queue and go straight into distribution. So to me, there are two things that people don't, or there's something that people don't talk about regarding AI, which is critical, which is why I love Derisq, and I like to talk about it whenever I can. We need to have a way of pricing the risk of any molecule at any point in the value chain. If I look at the value chain holistically of drug discovery, development, and distribution, it is probably the least efficient value chain that I can point to quantitatively. And that is precisely because at each step in the process, the ability to price risk for capital allocation is really low. And when you have a value chain where each step in the value chain, it has a really impaired ability to price risk collectively through the capital allocation mechanisms of the world, it's going to be an inefficient and slow value chain, which is exactly what it has been. And then it is subject to some of the additional challenges that we see because it is healthcare and it is related to many government policies and programs. To me, the key use of AI is not to generate the molecules, it's to help us figure out which molecules matter. Which molecules should we accelerate development on if we're on the research side of the value chain? If we're the critical funding, okay, who's going to fund the phase 1, phase 2, then the phase 3 trials, right? Those, how do we go from what we have today, Dr. Gupta, which is a risk pricing that is basically the same as venture capital, 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 15 things that you put your capital in is going to maybe give you a return, to one where multiple things that you invest in are going to give you a return, and your job is to figure out what on average is that return based on TAM and a lot of other variables in your risk pricing models. So to me, this is a critical use of AI, not the sexy stuff that everybody talks about. Oh, we're going to generate all these molecules and all these therapies, but how do we take and put efficiency into the value chain, allow capital allocators to allocate capital effectively, and allow researchers to focus on the research that matters and not on 1,000 molecules that don't matter. To me, that is the critical thing here, Dr. Gupta.
Thank you, Greg. I think you're right. I mean, the ability to have that answer beforehand is a game changer. So thanks for that thought process. Now let me turn over to Ty, because we've just heard about some of the key challenges and inefficiencies that's slowing the biotech and growth and funding. Now, Ty, could you walk us through what the Derisq product is and how it directly addresses these pain points, making the investment process more transparent, more efficient, more predictive? So I'm going to turn it over to you to talk with us through the Derisq product.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gupta, and it's a pleasure to be here. And as the previous speakers have very eloquently stated, it's a very difficult business model at best. And although AI is going to make massive changes in this industry in the coming years, the best use of AI today is how do we use AI to accurately predict how a drug could potentially perform in a clinical trial very early in the process. So we're not only preventing risk, we're identifying risk very early in the process before the big dollars are spent. As one biotech CEO, before all the non-sexy dollars are spent on a drug, how do we help make no-go decisions earlier in the process, especially before committing to a clinical trial, a costly clinical trial. So GATC Health, our company, has introduced a product called Derisq with a Q, and it's the first AI report for predictive risk intelligence in the biopharma sector. So the Derisq report, or AI report, it uses GATC Health's AI technology or platform. And a couple of quick sound bites on that. The platform can analyze about 4 trillion data points in less than 8 minutes. It simulates human systems biology, and that gives us that ability to predict safety, efficacy, and non-obvious off-target effects of a drug candidate. And we're able to do that. We've demonstrated that we can predict about 11 times better than an actual clinical trial. So where a clinical trial has over about a 90% failure rate through the clinical trial process, as was pointed out, we can predict with about 90% accuracy how a drug is going to perform. So technically what we're really doing is we're predicting a drug candidate's negative and positive activation on a biological target or targets. This has been independently verified by the University of California, Irvine, where we demonstrated 91% specificity and 86% sensitivity. So this is an unprecedented ability to predict biological effects of compounds of novel drugs or drug candidates in response to those disease and therapeutic targets, about 11 times better than the industry. So these study results led to GATC becoming the exclusive partner with Lloyd's of London's syndicate, MCI. As you know, Lloyd's one of the most respected insurance brands in the world, where our platform is predicting these clinical outcomes. So Lloyd's is offering the first ever clinical trial insurance program. So this is, as you can imagine, very significant when you have a very risk-averse business like insurance underwriting, using GATC's AI platform to predict reliably and consistently how a drug is going to perform against clinical endpoints. That's a very big deal, probably the biggest deal you could make as far as risk aversion. So Derisq does exactly what it says, what the name connotes. It de-risks decision making anywhere in the discovery development timeline by accurately predicting that safety, efficacy, and those potential off-target effects. So we like to think of it this way. It's almost like the FICO score, standardized credit risk in the consumer credit market. Derisq is creating the first objective, accurate, objective readout for drug development. So we do believe this is going to be a standard. We're not only seeing this being used by biotech companies, biotech executives to make these decisions. We also, as you can imagine, with the Lloyd's of London relationship, we have a very large interest in using the Derisq report in the financial decision making for investment banks, VCs, and others that are making these critical early stage investments in biotech companies. So the report's already been tested and it's in use today by biotech firms. The nice thing about the Derisq report is it enables biotech companies to get involved with actionable AI data very quickly. So there's not a long form agreement. It's about a 5.5-page agreement. From the time we receive and curate the data from the biotech company, that takes about 3 to 4 weeks to run that report. It's an iterative process that we have with the biotech firm. So the report is a bespoke report that is designed to respond directly to the questions or concerns that the biotech company has. So it's not like we just ingest the data and press a button. It's a collaborative, iterative process that our team has with the biotech team to make sure we're uncovering and predicting what could potentially happen in their next phase of clinical development. So some of the analytics that the report includes is prediction of clinical trial endpoints. We have quantitative safety and efficacy predictions, as I stated, off-target risk analysis, which helps with patient selection strategy, which patients are going to perform or not perform to help with the patient selection process. And there's also a summary for executive review as well as deep dive in data. It's about a 40-page report. So it can help with smarter trial design, reducing investor risk, capital efficiency. That's a big one. We can help and are helping biotech companies analyze multiple candidates in their pipeline. So helping to prioritize their pipeline, as many on the call know, that if unfortunately the drug that the biotech company picks fails in that next phase of clinical development, it's almost going to be impossible for them to get funding for the subsequent drugs in that pipeline. So I can give you many examples, but one example I think is worth highlighting, which was, I think, representative of some of the results that we're getting, is we had a client that was looking to raise funding for their next phase of clinical development, moving into a later phase 2 development. And they were looking for objective validation to help them prioritize cancer indications, which would also support their fundraising. And the Derisq report delivered this in-depth safety, efficacy, and off-target prediction for 2 forms of cancer, allowing them to select really quite objectively new high potential indications and optimize their clinical trial design. Also, we identified a non-obvious yet unknown off-target effect, which could have created risk in patient drop-off. So they were able to remedy that before designing the clinical trial. So, a couple of highlights, I think, is providing a tool which very quickly provides actionable data in detail that allows science teams to work smarter, faster, enables executives to make these critical executive decisions about capital spending. And I'll close with a quote from Dr. David Mazzo, who's the president and CEO of Lasata Therapeutics, one of our clients. Quote, he said, Derisq is a powerful new tool to help us reduce uncertainty and improve efficiency of research development and strategic decision making. Derisq provides an assessment based on simulation of human biology of how drug candidates should be expected to perform in clinical trials. So I'll close by saying, before a dollar is spent or a dollar is committed for a clinical trial, it really makes sense, as the team has said, as to how do we understand the non-obvious risk of moving forward with capital decision in a clinical trial. So if you want more information on Derisq, go to derisq.ai. That's Derisq with a Q.ai. And thank you for your time. Looking forward to the questions.
Thank you, Ty. Thank you. It's really important. And I would just say that all you explained is almost like having a crystal ball for drug discovery and development. So again, DERISQ is the name. And I really want to thank you to our incredible panel for sharing your insights today. Now we're going to get to the exciting part, which is your questions. So please continue to submit those questions in the chat. We're going to take up some and try to get those answered. So let me start by asking a very simple question, but maybe I'll ask Lynn, and then everybody else can chime in as well. So we want to have a group conversation here. So there's a lot of talk about AI in healthcare. How are investors thinking about utilizing AI in making their investment decisions? And that's one of the questions. So Lynn, if you want to just tell us a little bit again, and anybody else can welcome to jump in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Gupta. I think, I'll keep this conversation with a limit of how do we incorporate AI into healthcare investing. I think what Gregory hit earlier is a very key point, right? If you look at what's AI been integrated, what part of AI has been integrated into the healthcare investment or in a biotech landscape in general is in the front end of, drug discovery, making it efficient. Not saying there's no role. Absolutely, there's a role for AI in it. But I think the more the more important and the more kind of interesting value creation role of AI is how do we, once the drug is in development, how do we make this process more efficient, right? From an investor perspective, how do we make, again, this correlation of risk reward into a kind of sensible a ratio, right? I think one thing I want to mention is that we've done multiple studies about, how does a drug coming from, if it's a phase 1 stage drug, what's the probability of success when it gets become an approved drug? Obviously, it's less than 10%, right? Once you get to phase 2, you're hitting that 40% maybe, and then phase 3, okay, you're looking at 60% range. I'm not talking about astronomical improvement of that. Our valuation of a company or of a drug is based on that risk, right? Or a discount rate that we apply to this drug. So even incrementally for an early stage asset, you can reduce that risk or improve the probability of success from 10% to 20%. I'm not talking about to 100, to 90, right? To 20%, doubling that chance. That means we're, feeling almost twice as comfortable of how this drug, right, is going to be valued, how the company is going to be valued. And I think that's a meaningful amount of capital that can get into space. So it is not just about the upfront drug discovery. I think it is the process. It's the trial, right? Once you have the concept, how do you turn that concept into a reality? And that's where the AI, I think the role comes in, and becomes absolutely crucial for an investment world.
Thanks, Lynn. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I can add a little bit to that. I think in terms of investment patterns and Derisq, Ty mentioned Lloyd's of London. Basically, what we're also doing is trying to provide more secure funding through this insurance. So this insurance essentially, if you spend $10 million on a trial and the endpoints fail, you get $10 million back on that insurance. That insurance solves a major problem if you use it for financing purposes in the biotech sector. The problem with biotech sector is that it's so risky that only VCs are in there in phase 1 and phase 2. You have no debt. You have venture debt, but that's only with companies that have cash in the bank enough to cover the debt, essentially. So they raised equity in the past to get that debt issued. But the key is that the Lloyd's insurance allows us to basically de-risk biotech investments because we can now offer secure debt into this sector with lenders get paid back by Lloyd's when the trial fails, or equity investors get paid back by Lloyd's when the trials fail. So the companies can take out an insurance on their trial and then go to either debt or equity investors and have highly de-risked investment that they offer for their trial because the downside is covered on top of de-risk delivering in a higher probability of success. Those two major aspects, a higher probability of success for either debt or equity investors, but also the downside is taken away essentially through the insurance from Lloyd's.
That's a good point. Both of those are very, very good points. So,
and I think something else I think it's interesting is an observation is, we've talked to, hundreds of biotech executives over the last 6 months through this process, and the theme that keeps coming out is there's been this major investment, not just in dollars, but in mind share that these biotech, biopharma companies are taking to look at AI and explore AI, and some have adopted it. And as the speakers had said earlier, that's a huge shift, not only in spending dollars, but how the method of how drug discovery and drug development takes place. So it's literally like moving the Titanic. And what I'm hearing over and over again is that the pressure on these companies, especially the public companies, to demonstrate some kind of an ROI on this AI investment, the pressure is growing. But knowing that the scientific process and the results of AI is going to be potentially, 1 or 2 years out, maybe more, the opportunity that we're hearing is that I think this is how history is going to judge AI and biopharma, is that the impact on science is going to be phenomenal, but the impact on the economic model is what's going to transform the use of AI in biopharma. How do we go not from discovery up to development, but even further up to the investment of dollars into the whole process based on reduced risk?
Right, right. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it is important that the economics drive the ultimate decisions to figure out the right treatments, right care, and ultimately get people healthy. So that's a really important point as well. Let me turn over to Greg for a minute. And of course, again, this is a conversation, so please feel free to chime in as well. As alluded to a little bit by Ty, we've covered a lot of biotech today and emerging biotech, but obviously there are downstream implications for the pharma value chain. Let me ask you, Greg, to begin this conversation part with, because this is an important question that's been coming in. What could those impacts be to the pharma value chain?
Yeah, I think I alluded to this earlier, Dr. Gupta. It's a pretty inefficient value chain until you get to the distribution side, and then it's really efficient. And I'll tell you what, the big pharma companies rival Disney and Netflix when it comes to getting their product distributed out into the world, right? They've navigated both complex payer and complex provider systems for decades in order to get product into the hands of consumers that might benefit ultimately from that. The problem in the chain, of course, is upstream of that. And so, as I look at the value chain, to me, we're about to run into a choke point, and that choke point is the capacity of the value chain to perform clinical trials. Today, the entire amount of clinical trial capacity is informed by the fact that research is slow, up to a decade, to produce molecules and drugs. And then, we only have an expectation that 1 out of 10 molecules will get through. And then on the distribution side, they've sort of got a cadence on how many molecules they're picking up a year to push into distribution, right? So the whole thing is at a pace that, frankly, isn't going to cut it in the future. Particularly, again, if you accept the fact that, all these large tech companies, including GATC, who also has the ability to manufacture new molecules, start pushing molecules into the back end of the chain, the choke point will very quickly become the capacity to do clinical trials. And so it will no longer be acceptable to put a molecule into a phase 1 trial. It only has, whatever was it, Ty, 7 out of 10 will get through, 3 won't, I think is what I recall, something like that. And 1 out of 10 will get all the way through 3 in today's world, right? We need whatever capacity we have in phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials at the macro level. We need to use all of it with the molecules that will get through or are most statistically likely to get through, because that is what is going to change the human condition for billions of people on this planet. And you guys know that I speak from personal experience here. I have a condition that should be treatable. It's not. And I have friends and family that I've lost, as do you all, to things that we should not have lost them to, frankly, at this point in the evolution of science. So to me, if I look at the macro level, what this is going to do is it's going to let the distributors get much more volume of distribution, but only if we can get the right molecules into the finite capacity of clinical trials mechanisms to create that yield. That to me is the critical thing, Dr. Gupta.
Exactly right, Greg. Thank you for that comments. Anyone else?
I think just a quick comment on that, right? If we think about drug development, it's a funnel, right? At the top of the funnel, you have a very wide opening, right? That's where all the candidates, everything gets screened. there are a lot of diseases we do not know. There's a lot of disease we do not know how to address. At the end of the day, it's a numbers game, and that's where AI can come and play, not just at the beginning of the funnel, which is helping us to select, right? Instead of putting 100 or 1,000, random or semi-selected drugs in there. Imagine that number becomes 100 or thousands of highly selective. Like your top the funnel is already very highly filtered, and you can imagine the results. The outcome is, when you get to the bottom of the funnel, these drugs are much higher quality, much likely to succeed, much more. Again, I hate to use the term again, de-risked, right? In a way that higher quality drug, and that's numbers game we're applying, right? And that is something that we're trying to do with human power. But I think that's where ultimately where AI is going to come in and really, really improve that process.
Yeah, I mean, if we had an opportunity to turn 1 out of 10 successes into 9 out of 10 successes for anything,
Right.
any sector would take it overnight. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
whole point. Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask, I mean, I know Greg mentioned the scale of Disney and turned it maybe Thomas, and the question here is that biotech companies and investors alike are being approached by these large dominant AI and tech companies to integrate into their systems. So be it Amazon or Google or even some of the proven smaller boutique AI vendors. So what do you think, Thomas, that makes GATC and Derisq competitive against these platforms?
Yeah, I think there's two main advantages I see. One is that you can do it bespoke. You just get a de-risk report. You don't have to have a corporate agreement with Google to come into your company, essentially. These are freestanding de-risk reports that you can execute within a particular product, within a particular phase, essentially. That's a major advantage, I think. The second is that there's no other company that has taken their platform, giving it to a third party, and then had the third party evaluate the platform. That's what the UC Irvine evidence, in my view, is so crucial, because that GATC is the only company that has a third party evaluation. Every company in this space is going to claim they're better than bread and butter. But no one has put forward the evidence, which is indicative of that the evidence is not there. So GATC, I think, is unique in having that ability. Hey, send us blindly molecules, over 10,000 molecules. We will evaluate them, and you tell us if we're right or not. And no other company has done that. So it's kind of all, show me the money in some sense, what these companies are doing there, and they're not showing it.
Good point.
Yeah, I want to add to that too. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm with JTC, but the other feedback is, we're not a biotech company. We're not a pharma company. So we're a technology company. So we're in the business of helping these biotech companies win. We're very collaborative in our approach. The feedback we've been in front of the clients is, you guys want to win as badly as we do. And the other piece that we're learning more and more is there are other companies that have some levels of success in predicting efficacy across some therapeutic areas. We work in all therapeutic areas, and our ability to predict safety and these off-target effects, which is a big deal, as you biotech CEOs know, is that it's those kind of non-obvious potholes in the road that can really trip you up. And that's what our report is demonstrating its ability to do, is uncover those non-obvious risks very early.
Well, I think speaking about Derisq and speaking about these all of the work, I think one of the questions being asked is, for you, Ty, especially, but anyone comment is what kind of drugs and what kind of therapeutic areas can be analyzed by the Derisq report. And again, you've given us some great examples of the application. And if you have more, please do highlight for us.
Yeah, happy to. As you can imagine, with all the due diligence that we did with Lloyd's of London and MCI, it was months and months of that for them to select us as the exclusive platform. We had to test across many different therapeutic areas. So there's some. So Cell therapies, that's something that we're not doing yet. But basically, and there's maybe some cancers, but basically every therapeutic area you can think of, we can predict. We had to demonstrate that to Lloyd's of London. And as far as we're obviously focused on small molecules, but we can predict biologics, proteins, enzymes, monoclonal antibodies. We're doing circular RNA now, peptides in general. So really, I think this speaks to the platform. So our platform isn't like this one big blob of AI that has to be kind of the God model that has to figure everything out at once. We have literally thousands of AI models built on our platform that are specifically designed for different therapeutic areas, different levels of testing, different things that would be required for FDA clinical trial testing. So if we're not able to do something today, it's not difficult for us to train the system and set that up to manage it. I'll also add too is that one of the questions we typically get is how much data do you need? What data do you need? We have a tremendous amount of data on our system. The system also generates its own data. That's how we're able to get so accurate. So, of course, any drug company that's probably filed the IND has plenty of data for us to use. We do import multi-omic data. We don't need a lot of patient data. Multi-omic data is key for us. And we have a team of bioinformatics that curate that data because, as anyone on the call knows, it's involved in AI. It's not just the quantity of the data, it's the quality of the data. So we're very good at curating that data, and the data is protected. So if a client provides data to us, obviously they've done all their patent work, but we sequester the data, run the analysis, and when the project is done, that data is returned back to the client.
And it's human data. I think that's the important part. I think also, as you mentioned, Ty, that this is all human data as opposed to the animal data. Yeah.
Dr. Gupta, that's a great point. From the very beginning, and by the way, this platform has been in development for over a dozen years. Is that we only analyze on human data, and that's one of the reasons that GATC is the only AI company that is on the board of advisors for the Humane Society or Humane World. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of discussions going on with our ability to help with this non-animal method or NAMS new approach methods that the FDA and NIH are working on. Very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, so this is pretty much, I mean, I hate to say it because I'm going to ask a question that's been coming in for everybody else, for the whole panel here. But it sounds to me like this is going to revolutionize just not only the way we discover and develop molecules, but also maybe spare the tens of millions of animals in the future that are sort of put to use and harmed in the process, not only the time and the money, but also and that's one of the reasons that Humane World and others are working closely with us on this aspect. So with that, let me ask everybody. I mean, it's good to respond about how do you see this industry changing in the next 3 years or so?
I can jump in. I just came back from a AI and drug discovery and development conference in Boston a couple weeks ago, and it was 3 days of it was all about AI and drug discovery and drug development. And the couple of things I heard is as I mentioned earlier, there's more pressure on the scientific management team to show some kind of an ROI on the AI investment, and the pressure is real, and I could feel it. I think the other thing is that almost like any other, any other technology, it starts out as this separate thing, but it's just a matter of time where it's no longer a separate thing. Drug discovery, drug development will incorporate AI. It's not a separate, methodology that is on the outside of the current drug discovery and development process. And I think the other thing that we're going to see is we're going to see that which has been the theme of this call, is that I think we're going to see a lot of the capital that's been sitting on the sidelines come back into this very rapidly when they see that there's a good ROI to predict.
Yeah. Others, please feel free to chime into that question.
Yeah, I think I wanted to stress, I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but like I said, there's a certain type of investor that's currently funding the FDA pipeline the hope is with Derisq, both in terms of its scientific value, but also in terms of generating more secure financing through the Lloyd's mechanism, will lead to other forms of investors coming in that are much more risk averse. They currently can't tolerate the failure rate in biotech, essentially. And once pension funds or whatever come in, and this is safe enough for them, if they have a downside protected, that's a massive amount of capital infusion that can come in and presumably lead to a lot better health in the next 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, I'll add my pieces of follow-on to that. I think we're going to go from a world where the large distributors, I'll call them, sort of look at the pipeline, what's coming through phase 3 and or is out of phase 2, and they're going to invest through phase 3 based on the largest TAM, not necessarily the greatest social impact or other criteria. And I think to Tomas's point, we're going to have actually much more of a shaping through organizations like the ALS Foundation, for example, where diseases don't necessarily have large TAMs or conditions that don't actually get the capital they need to, with GATC support, to address conditions that should be addressed. But because of the current, we just got to we got to figure out which the blockbusters are going to be in the current crop of stuff in the pipeline. That's not a rational thing for society to do if it's looking to impact the lives of its citizens, right? So I think we have an opportunity in 3 years with GATC and Derisq and the capabilities that we could see that pivot. And now we're pushing from the back end through to distribution versus distributor sort of randomly picking the winners based on TAM.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, we're already in discussions with Stand Up to Cancer, which is one of the largest patient advocacy research organizations, essentially. You might have seen them during the World Series. The World Series usually takes a minute or two to acknowledge that organization. And we're in discussion with them, essentially setting up a fund that's going to be de-risked this way through the Derisq product, where they get to basically use their research funding to advance, particularly obviously focused on oncology, but also diagnostics.
I mean, I'll take it a step further. We could also even see Dr. Gupta crowdsourcing of funding based on Derisq, bringing in basic science and data and doing the scoring, crowdsourcing the clinical trials to force it through the pipeline, right? Now we still got to get distributors to distribute it, so that's a different part of the equation. But I just think you're going to see a lot more push through different providers of both capital and social agenda than you can see today.
The analogy that comes to mind, I know I'm oversimplifying it, but can you imagine a world of lending without FICO, the FICO score? So, it's almost like, when you introduce a FICO type score, this reliable standard across the industry, it's just going to open up all kinds of things that have been on the sidelines. Yeah.
Totally.
I got an important question here I want to ask because we've been talking so much about Derisq and the ability to look future and make that difference both for investments and others. The question is, what happens when a biotech company gets a negative Derisq report? So let's talk about that a little bit. What does that mean?
I can jump in. The analogy we use is what happens if we call the baby ugly, and it happens. As you can imagine. And there's fear. I mean, there's real fear that a lot of these biotechs have, depending on where they are in their investment and their development stage. Do they want to know the truth? The answer is everyone that has gotten data from us is delighted that they understood what was going to happen before it would happen. So nobody's gotten to a situation where it's just blown up in their face. What it's allowed them to do is kind of a scale, really, of maybe make no adjustments other than maybe their narrative changed in terms of investment. They have more confidence because they're actually showing that there is a report that's used by Lloyd's of London that demonstrates the success of their drug. So that helps. Matter of fact, we had one of our companies, a public biotech company, that had 2 buy ratings in their announcement included the GATC relationship. So you could say that there's kind of a halo effect of using AI in your process. we've had a number of clients that have discovered new therapeutic areas that they didn't know existed, that they could very rapidly get into another trial. We've had another client that did some discovery around testing combinations of drugs to get into new therapeutic areas. But typically what they do is they're able to make minor adjustments and then go into that clinical design with a lot more confidence than they had before, because the AI has predicted what's going to happen in that clinical trial before they went
And I
into.
would also add, and this has come up in our discussions with the Lloyd's financing program, the fact that the company is applying for Derisq or Lloyd's funding is completely proprietary, particularly for this purpose. We let the company decide what they want to do with the negative information. We're not going to disclose it to anyone except the company, essentially. So they get to disclose it to whoever they want, but certainly not, we're not doing it for them.
And we also, this is from two public biotech companies. They did the legal research themselves, where they did determine that, or their lawyers determined that any report they got from an AI platform wasn't required to be disclosed as a public company. It wasn't a clinical trial outcome. It was a prospective prediction of a clinical trial outcome.
Yeah, so it's almost like when we talk about the negative piece, it's almost like we can predict you're about to have a collision and you can turn and avoid that, basically. So that's the meaning in so many ways of a negative report that gives you a chance to fix whatever you need to do before and have more informed clinical trials. So, I know we're getting close to the end here. So let me just take one opportunity here because we have such an esteemed panel here, ask this question to all of you all, because we've talked so much about Derisq. The question is, will Derisq change the way that investors look at the risk profile of biotech and perhaps pharma companies moving forward?
Well, if it doesn't, I'm not sure what they're doing their jobs right. I mean, it's like saying I'm a bank and I'm going to do credit scoring without FICO at this point. So I think now, if they don't know about GATC because it's a relatively new product, that's one thing. But if they know about it and they know enough to diligence it, after they diligence it and look at how Lloyd's and others use it, I think it'll become a tool and a very complex set of tools that any capital allocator or decision maker is going to use to determine the course of actions they take with their capital. That's what I think is going to happen.
I mean, I think that go ahead.
Yeah, just to pile on with Greg and Thomas, good guy to have one of the closing thoughts. But I'm going to pile on with Greg. I actually am hearing boards and investors saying that this type of report may be a fiduciary responsibility, not just a recommendation and a nice tool, but it could be somewhat of a requirement in terms of ongoing due diligence and disclosure for these investment partners. Sorry, Thomas.
No, I just think that the proof is in the pudding. Essentially, what are the results? We know that currently the people, a lot of VCs claim they know what they're doing in selecting these molecules, but 90% of them fail. It's true of VCs in general, right? So, you can argue you have all the Nobel Prize winners on your team or whatever, but you're failing 90% of the time. So basically you need to look at the results. Forget, the inputs are irrelevant. What is the result of AI relative to human prediction, essentially? And that's the key, I think. And I think there's no question that AI is going to outperform humans here.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And again, so much interest on this. So I'm going to just ask a very last one because questions keep coming. So let me ask this last question here. Can an investor or an investment bank buy a Derisq report to run on their clients?
Absolutely. We are impartial. So if anyone wants prediction, now, of course, what we're finding with the investment banks is they're potentially pushing that responsibility back on the biotech company as far as the due diligence they're providing. But absolutely, it really is a question of who's providing the data. So there would have to be an agreement with us, with whoever's providing the data to us. Great question.
And this has been a fantastic panel. I mean, this is a lot of information shared here. As we close, I want to make sure that before I have some comments, just maybe go around and give you all some last thoughts here for just a few seconds before we get to the very end. Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, we're at the infancy here, right? We're just launching these products, and think of when we launched other things that are very, very important. It's going to be a growing learning curve here, but there's no question that this is going to basically bring in a lot more capital into biotech investment from people who were too risk averse to come in my view. And if that takes place, the ultimate outcome is going to be a healthier population in the future, and that's really whatever all this stuff is about in that.
Great. Yep. Lynn, to you.
Yeah, to answer your question earlier, Dr. Gupta, where is AI going to fit in healthcare, right, or healthcare investing? It's going to be everywhere, right, from the top to the bottom to the middle. I think having a more efficient process that de-risking the investment decision-making process, de-risking, reduce the amount of risk that investors taking. These are tremendously welcoming tools for anyone in our seats to welcome to adopt, right? And as Tomas mentioned, the adoption rate and the speed of adoption could vary from person to person, from places to places. But I think the incorporation and integration of AI in healthcare investing is definitely happening.
Thank you. Greg, over to you.
Yeah, there are a lot of pundits, and I'll put myself with this bucket, that believe the current technology S-curve is the one that could put us into the true age of abundance, in parallel with the energy S-curve, with fusion advances and other things. But we'll only enter abundance if we solve healthcare. And we only solve healthcare if we take our finite resource and infrastructure and optimize what we push through it. And to me, that's why Derisq is so important, because it is a key element to solving for abundance and solving for healthcare.
Thank you. And over to you, Ty.
Yeah, I want to take the high road like Greg. I love it. I think that if we look at this at a macro level, a global level, is that what would a world be like if we had an abundance of affordable, very safe, efficacious medication? What would be the economic benefit? What would be the social benefit? There's just, the cascading effects of that are phenomenal. And I can't think of, if you think about it, what's the most broken economic model in the world? It's that model. So if we fix that model, the flip side is exponential in terms of the benefit to society.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And thank you once again to our distinguished panel here, Lynn, Thomas, Greg, and Ty, for sharing your experiences and expertise, as well as your perspectives today. I also want to give a big thank you and shout out to LifeSci for hosting this event, as well as to all of you in the attendance for your time, your attention, and your thoughtful questions. We've had wonderful conversations today. So if you're interested in exploring what Derisq can do for your organization, please visit derisq.ai. That's DERISQ.ai. And if we didn't have the chance to address your question during this session, please reach out directly to Ty here, one of our panelists, at ty@gatchealth.com. That's ty@gatchealth.com. Once again, on behalf of all of us at GATC Health, thank you again for joining us to discuss Derisq. We look forward to continuing this conversation and helping you make smarter, safer, and better investment decisions in the future. Thank you, everyone. And with that, we'll end this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.